Okay, I want to just see if I can chime into this discussion about poetic atheism, which, to be serious, is talking about, and I think it also loops into some of the things that you've been saying, Gary, if you're watching this video, about words, and it's also in some ways a continuation of some of the stuff I did recently about, just other stuff, I won't go into that right now. But yeah, first off, a description of what I mean by poetics. I think there's ways of looking at poetic in relation to atheism particularly, which is the opposite of what you would normally associate atheism with. Because often atheism, and certainly in my own case, atheism is associated with a particular kind of respect for the scientific method, and on a political level, the establishment of protection of secular societies in which authority is couched in things like scientific methods, as opposed to religious and other kinds of dogmas. So there's this assumption that atheism and scientism or scientism, slightly pejorative terms, but those kind of things go together, and I would concur with that. So poetics is often seen, I think, or is often felt to be misaligned with that. Particularly when we're thinking of poetry and poems, those are expressions, forms of expression, which would seem to be the opposite of scientific and empirical forms of expression. When we think about poetry, particularly if we're just consumers of it, and maybe also writers of it, we associate it with ways of thinking which are deliberately fuzzy, which are deliberately ambiguous, which are deliberately about resistance to the idea of the fact. It's all those, or being much more concerned with the emotions than with rationality and reason. So I think it has those kinds of associations. But my understanding of poetics is a bit different to that, and it may be so different that it's inappropriate here, but I'll give it a shot anyway. I mean, my understanding of poetics really comes from, I guess, cognitive linguistics, which is one of my interests. And within that field, poetics is poetics is the means by which we give expression to thought. The means by which we give expression to thought, usually language, but there are other poetics as well. But if we just stay within language, we have these thoughts, or thoughts have us, or thoughts occur to us, or thoughts happen inside us, and then somehow we give expression to those by saying these words that are coming out of our mouths right now. And something, some structuring process has taken place, some translation process, some iteration process has happened by which those thoughts become language. And within cognitive linguistics, that iteration, translation process is poetics. So it's not just the poetics of sentences that rhyme and scan and talk about emotions and Moon June stuff. Poetics is any kind of process like that. And there are different genres of poetics, different kinds of translation process, different kinds of expressive processes, which accord to different kinds of concepts. And so, for example, within that idea, scientific language is a form of poetics, which isn't to say that it's doing the same job as other forms of poetics. It isn't to say that it's equally emotional driven or any of those kind of things that I've already talked about in relation to what you might commonly think of as poetry. But scientific language is a particular set of linguistic and expressive techniques for doing certain things with concepts and sharing concepts in very particular ways and making very particular kinds of statements about the world. And it has a form of its own. It has a particular set of poetic tendencies, poetic conventions, if you like. And different forms of expression have different forms of poetics. Political language has a different poetics. Ideological language, different poetics. The language of intimacy and relationship has a different set of poetics. And because they're driven by different concepts are trying to be articulated within these poetics. And so they form different things. And each of those poetics and all language, at least in the sense that I'm talking about it here, is full of very particular kind of linguistic forms, particularly figurative language. You know, even the most scientific text, although it may not appear to be, is full of metaphor and metonymy and synecdoche and those kind of linguistic forms. Which again isn't to say that they are just poems. It isn't to say that they're just I don't know. It doesn't reduce their status as means of establishing truth about objective conditions out there in the world. It just means that the way we do that is by using very particular kinds of figurative speech. I mean, that's what for me at least, that's what Richard Dawkins is on about when he says science is the poetry of reality. I mean, I'll probably phrase it slightly differently, but science is the poetry of reality, Dawkins says. I don't think this is exactly what he meant, but I mean, I'm choosing to interpret that as a recognition that scientific language is as I say, the particular form of poetics that we use to describe the shared world that appears to our senses and appears to all of our instrumentation and has those qualities of science like verifiability and falsifiability and all those kind of things. It's something Rancière talks about as well, and I've talked about that in previous videos. So when I'm talking about poetics, that's the poetics I'm talking about. Now, as far as poetic atheism goes, and I think this will probably be a subject of a different video I'll have to make, I mean, what I'm interested in there is, you know, what are the expressive forms, particularly linguistic forms, that either are already used in atheism or are appropriate to atheism. Because I think what's come up in some of my videos recently, I know Gary's been talking about this, in all his talk about kind of phantasmagorical stuff, is that many of us who consider ourselves atheists, and I would include myself in this, who consider ourselves atheists, if you were to analyse the language, and again I include my language, you would find there's lots and lots of hidden references to at least religious concepts, if not God concepts, if not theistic concepts. So it's almost as if there are gods and religions and religious beliefs lurking in the language, which you can pull out if you do the analysis of the language, which is indicating that those things are working as concepts in us, because language is the traces of the concepts, as I've always tried to indicate. So it is quite interesting, I think, that in that regard, that even those of us who are atheists are perhaps in some ways not poetic atheists. We're poetic theists, but that on the surface of our language we seem to be saying we don't believe in God, we don't believe in angels, we don't have any truck with that religious stuff. But as I say, kind of hidden in the interstices of our language, in sentence structure, in metaphors, in metonymy, in a lot of that other kind of stuff, it's just riddled with God talk, and that presents different kinds of problems, I think, which might be interesting to unpack. Anyhow, that's enough for this video. I'll probably make at least another one, probably another two on this. Thanks very much.